Hello, everyone, and welcome to a Dresden Files review. The last Dresden Files review I will be doing until Peace Talks is released. And it's going to be 3 in 1, for reasons I've stated here before on the channel. Book reviews don't perform great for me, and they're usually shorter, which is also bad for the algorithm. So combining, I get a longer video. That isn't going to hurt the channel as much, and that's why we are here. But don't worry, that doesn't mean I'm going to softball these reviews and make them something that's not as in-depth as I normally go. In fact, I'm going to go pretty far in-depth for each book here, and I'm going to go ahead and say, because these have been out for so long, full spoiler warning! I'm going spoilers ham here. Turns out, Dresden, housefly in a trench coat. Whole time. Boom. Spoiled for you. But seriously, spoiler warning, get out of here for Ghost Stories, Cold Days, and Skin Game. But let's go ahead and jump into that first book here, shall we? We have Ghost Stories, which is a controversial one for me here because I put it way higher than it seems most people do. I enjoyed what Jim accomplished here in Ghost Stories. I touched on this a bit in my tier list, but for me, Ghost Stories was such a breath of just refreshment for Dresden. Not that the series necessarily needed it, but after the recent events, which I've talked about, after what happened in Changes, it feels very right to have Dresden step out of what occurred, having this isolated reframing of who Dresden is, where he's out of his element and he's just having to mull over the consequences of his actions and see what recent events have done to his friends. And we as the reader are kind of getting to re-know him at this point as well, because his mind is being tinkered with. He's not really in control like he used to. While he's more powerful than ever, he's in this corporeal form where he's relearning what his position in society needs to be. And the scenes where he's reuniting with his friends had such emotional weight to me, and they're slowly coming to terms with the fact that he's dead, while simultaneously realize that some element of his being is with them, just constantly hit for me every time, especially the stuff with Molly. That really elevated Ghost Stories for me. Seeing the psychological ramifications of someone Molly idolized, someone Molly saw as invincible. Dresden was a hero to her, taken away and hurt so badly, just made Molly so vulnerable, so dark, and that inevitable fear, that undeification of Dresden for her, that mentor suddenly being brought down and shown to be mortal, makes her more afraid than ever. And as fear often does, it results in Molly, okay, let's just address it, becoming a serial killer. Molly's a serial killer. She's Dextering the shit out of it in this book, and I really like that turn for her. It's, again, not something I could have predicted, and Jim is so good at that, just ignoring what you think is going to happen and showing you what actually is set up and earned. Well done. All of those things work. Of course, there were some sloppier things. And I even went on the Dresden subreddit, where apparently my tier list was posted, and saw at least one person disagreeing with my ranking, saying that no, Ghost Stories plot was too sloppy. And I totally understand that. It's just, for me, it made up for it in other ways. And I definitely just enjoy seeing Dresden go a direction that, once again, I didn't see coming. I mean, no one, I think, sees the ending of Changes coming. And having this complete story that is devoted to letting you, the reader, know nothing's going to be the same again. And so, yeah, the pacing isn't perfect, the plot's a bit messy, but the character work with everyone I found to be so on point and makes so much sense without being predictable. That I ended up just saying, yeah, Ghost Stories is one of my faves. It's going to be one of my faves of Dresden, because I can appreciate the author's genius, Jim Butcher's plan going into full effect to making it so that right after these giant wave of crashing events, we kind of almost have this is exaggerating a little bit, but Stormfront feeling of we're starting anew. So I'll maintain my rating of Ghost Stories here. I did see quite a few counter arguments, but I'm not gonna lie and say I didn't enjoy it as much as I did. I can acknowledge the flaws of Ghost Stories for sure, but for me, it's one of the top tier Dresden books. I think it was the exact step the series needed, but I've talked about this a little bit. So let's go ahead and transition into a more deep dive into Cold Days, where we have a lot set up in Ghost Stories, right? We're seeing, okay, this is what the ramifications are of Changes. We're looking at the world. Great. Okay, all the friends are in different positions. The stakes are as high as ever. Now Dresden is quote unquote reborn. Not really. He's just out of a coma, going through physical therapy, and now he is the Winter Knight. He's taking upon a mantle where you thought he was fish out of water in Ghost Stories. Well, guess what? He's not going back in the water. We're just going to put him in another chunk of land where he again has to now he's kind of like rethinking who he is. Now Dresden has to rethink his position in the world because he's doing this job. He can't get out of it. He is what he is, and Dresden must fulfill his duties. I'm just so happy that Jim Butcher didn't back down from this. We didn't see him just get out of being the Winter Knight. No, Dresden is now the Winter Knight. He's in the court. He's playing their game, which he hasn't really done before. And immediately, the intrigue in this book is just cranked up, where suddenly there's elements at play. We're seeing, well, I guess the people who were disappointed with Ghost Story's plot are gonna be satisfied with Cold Days. Because for me, this was a very plot-focused, while also having the reframing of Dresden's setting and position. We're learning so much about this side of the world, because it's our first time seeing it from this perspective, and that was so much fun. I liked meeting Santa Claus, who's a murderous And while Ghost Stories in some ways kind of lacked the typical Dresden from himself action, because he had to be this almost spectator position, meeting a kid and acting as this like good guy figure, which I enjoyed all those dynamics. Didn't necessarily love the villain. I'll give you guys that. The villain was meh. I did enjoy Dresden being forced into a position where he's kind of spiritually, haha, jokes, mentoring this kid who's involved in a rough crowd. Forget all that, Dresden action is back in full force. In fact, kind of in greater form than we've seen before. Because of what's been built up, Dresden is now uber powerful in some ways compared to what he used to be. I mean, we have someone making the comment that he's borderline Spider-Man, which he rallies against with his nerd knowledge, but he acknowledges, yeah, I'm super strong. And that kind of builds up to one of the largest action climaxes we've seen in the series so far, right? We have this island where big figures are coming to play, and Dresden is beat down, but he certainly puts up more of a fight than we could have ever seen or expected from him before. That was all great. He also is bringing along his friends once again, and they're coming together and kind of proving how they've gotten better, how they've stepped up in Dresden's absence. This leads to one of the most dangerous elements Butcher is now playing with in his series, and we can't really judge whether or not yet he's going to totally land it. It's the thing I'm most nervous about in terms of the conclusion of Dresden. We're in the end game now, quote unquote, and it's one of the things I'm most concerned to see where it's going to go. And that's this Lovecraftian influence coming into play, these outsiders that are beyond, our realm, and they're clearly being given some form of mission. I get the temptation as an author to play with these Lovecraftian elements because they're so much fun, they're so different, they're so extreme, but it's really difficult to stick the landing. And while I liked Cold Days and all of their elements there, this island being this nexus of evil penitentiary type vibes, it was great. What is being crafted though in the background and how it will be executed, I'm very nervous to see how it plays out, purely because I've seen Lovecraftian elements mishandled, not fully realized, or abused several times before in my experience as a reader. So I'm just hoping that Jim doesn't end up giving us a diet form of these Lovecraftian monsters and we get the full, yes, these are beings beyond our comprehension. Their motives are totally unknown to us. We have no understanding. And we've seen him play with that. Specifically in this book, we have multiple times where, characters have to go, I need to dumb it down for you so that then you can dumb it down enough for Dresden to understand. And that's the kind of thing we have to do, right? We have to have these layers of, you can't understand them. They're the outside. They're beyond humanity's understanding. I like that, but I'm afraid we're not going to see that play all the way to the end. I'm so nervous to see like, oh yeah, what they wanted was world domination or universal domination. And that's, I don't know, for me, that's never been like the point of influences like these. Like Lovecraftian monsters don't want to rule or to conquer or destroy. Their goals are beyond us, right? Like they destroy the earth or all of humanity as a side effect of them rolling over in bed is like the common expression comparison. And that's what I want, but it seems to be Jim is setting them up to be much more directionally focused in the series. And that was my biggest concern from Cold Days. Everything else, though, totally worked for me. I liked the Winter Court evolution. The handing down of these mantles was not something I expected. I'm very curious to see how it plays out. Even the next book, we don't really get much of the ramifications from that. I was eagerly hoping we would going into Skin Game, but that seems to be something that Jim is going to be holding off for the upcoming books. I mean, we get some stuff, but not enough to really get that. But that's the beauty of Dresden, right? Like, something will happen, and then you'll learn the ramifications, see how it's affecting everyone 3 books down the road. We get the ramifications in the sense that we're not telling Michael and we're not telling the family of Molly. That's what we see so far. But that's Skin Game. Let's rewind back to Cold Days here. Dresden at the end of this book is reestablishing himself the best he can. He's trying to rebuild his life. I mean, since changes, right? He's just been wandering around baseless, kind of just trying to figure out what he should do. But we see definitely like a symbolic rebuilding where he's like, I'm going to build a new staff. And we see a literal one where he's like, this island's going to be my home now. And I think that was the proper time to do it, right? If it had been a whole other book of Dresden meandering, I think there would have been a severe sign of diminishing returns of this kind of fish out of water setting. Having 2 where he's trying to figure things out and then landing on he's reestablishing himself now, and we see that coming to fruition in Skin Game, that worked. That was, I think, a key timing where it really sets up nicely, because now I don't feel like things, at least I was going into reading Skin Game, I didn't think things were returning to normal. How could they possibly? But it felt like we were officially deep into this new start, and we can watch the new growth from the metaphorical flower that is our boy Dresden. So just kind of going back, I can see the problems with ghost stories. I had a couple issues, potential issues, I can't say they are yet because I haven't seen how they're going to land, with elements introduced in Cold Days, but still I consider both of those upper tier of Dresden. Skin Game, for me, was an interesting step forward with Dresden, where it seems like maybe establishing a possible new normal, but I don't think it's actually going to be, right? Like, there's no way Dresden's going to stay in this lane much longer. He just can't from a narrative perspective, at least I believe so, but a lot of things in this series I didn't think would go the direction they did. And Dresden's now just working for the bad guys, and as peace talks, then Battleground is coming closer, I feel like that's going to obviously maybe change up. Situations will fly in the air, allegiances, alliances change, and that's where we speculate from. But we see Dresden is officially going to go at least once on a job working for the bad people. He's doing his duties as this Winter Knight figure, and teaming up with Nicodemus and some other nefarious foes, grabbing Murph as a companion and heading into the underworld, Hades' lair, to steal things alongside his longtime rival. But once again, we're just examining as readers how different Dresden is and how his new aggression, even in a job where he's supposed to be level-headed, thinking through, taking care of a friend he's brought with him, Murph, isn't working out. He's someone who's worse than ever, losing control in ways. And he's at his best in this book when he's able to repress it, and he's at his worst when it seems to flood forth and he's unable to really put a decent rein on what is being affected onto him. But really what we need to focus on here is the end of Skin Game. I mean, the end of this has so many powerful moments for not only Dresden as a character, but implications for the future. There is, as I recently discussed on that same Dresden Files podcast, a bit of maybe possibly jumping the shark with Butters. I justified it in my head with him kind of taking up the mantle and becoming elevated, but I don't know, I still enjoyed it. I can see how people would have a problem with that though. And I guess my biggest criticism of Skin Game actually wouldn't be that Butters thing that a couple people I've heard criticize. For me, it's Nicodemus, who as a villain comes across a bit too vulnerable, a bit too nerve exposed for what he is supposed to be. I get that what Jim Butcher's trying to communicate to us is that there is still some humanity in there with Nicodemus, but for me, it just became that he's too manipulatable. Like, he's too vulnerable to being poked at from Dresden. Pips, if you want to be in the video that bad, I'll just pick you up. There you go. I found the manipulation Dresden afflicts on him to be a bit too easy. I mean, it's very obvious what Dresden's doing to anybody, and the end result is Nicodemus failing miserably. He would have won, and there's another bit of a, oh, actually, the whole time this guy was on Dresden's side, and we get a flashback explanation, which is a bit not the smoothest thing ever for me, but I get it, and it was still enjoyable. Leading up to then the final showdown at Michael's house, which was pretty great. It has that criticism people have mentioned with Butters, but I liked the action. It was thoroughly well written, made me want to go wham, 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 wham. And that action scene is then followed up by two very emotionally impactful moments for the series as a whole. Murphy and Dresden agreeing to kind of maybe pursue something, be a little more official, make it Facebook official maybe, and then Dresden sitting down and worrying with Michael about the future. Michael's position as he takes over Murphy's place in the heist, I loved. I mean, Michael is just so wonderful. He's so badass. He's so great. He's awesome. Michael's maybe the best character after Dresden and Molly in my mind. Love a good paladin. Love a good paladin. But this era of the books, the post changes Dresden. Can you tell I'm selling over changes? I mentioned it like 50 million times in this review. Has been better than I even expected. I maintain Ghost Stories is above where a lot of people put it at. Cold Days was a nice follow-up where we had to see Dresden completely out of his element and end it with him trying to reestablish some form of normalcy. And then we saw what that normalcy could be for him with what he's forced to do in the Skin game. And that ending with Michael, where we definitely see this is not what Dresden wants, and there's clearly some big things on the horizon that they're feeling coming, totally set me up for peace talks, pretty much as best as the series could. I'm so upset that I have to wait as long as I do for peace talks, and I'm not even one of the fans that has to wait a long, long time. You guys have been waiting for ages, and I feel bad for you. That sucks. But we're getting 2 in 1, right? And that's fantastic. Battleground will be out pretty soon after that. And let me know what you thought of this kind of rambly rant review discussion green screen style. Probably not going to be doing it a whole lot. I don't know how I feel about it. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Like and subscribe if you have not already. Hit the Patreon if you want to support what I do here. And have a good one, y'all. Peace.